one get into Morgan Stanley?
They're basically multi-year programs that lead to full-time rotational opportunities.
So for students graduating from ERM, what jobs or internships could they apply to?
While I run operational risk, there's so many different types of risk.
How do you enter a room full of strangers and not look socially awkward?
That's where you have to really evaluate and self-assess. Why am I here? What do I need to get out of it?
Can you give me a breakdown of my body language?
I would say you come off very genuine and happy.
Why is public speaking still the number one fear, and how do we actually get over it?
Public speaking makes people nervous because it exposes all of their sort of vulnerabilities.
So how do you spot a liar?
There's tips and tricks that experts say.
Any last words for someone watching this podcast?
Don't compromise. Life is too short.
Hi Saba, welcome to Ivy League Insights with Aliya Khatija.
Yeah, thanks, Aliya. Glad to be here.
Before we begin, we would like to get to know a little bit more about you. Where were you born and what was your childhood like?
I was born in Pakistan. That's where I'm originally from. And my childhood was unique in the sense that my dad worked for the Foreign Affairs. And so we traveled every few years all over the world. And so at a very, very young age, I was on airplanes going to different countries. And it wasn't until I was about 11, 12 that we decided to settle in the United States.
When did you come to New York?
We came to New York in 1996.
Okay, that's nice. What is wealth management? Could you walk us through what your day looks like at Morgan Stanley?
Yeah, so wealth management is one of our main biggest business units. It's in a nutshell, it's essentially servicing individual clients for the most part. It's a wide spectrum from individuals who are just starting out and trying to build wealth, all the way to the ultra high net worth population, to families who are looking for family offices. So wealth management really centers around building wealth, growing it, depending on the individual goals that individuals have.
Okay.
And a day at Morgan Stanley. So I am part of the wealth management business. I run the operational risk space, and I don't think any one day is the same. It's an exciting space to be in. We do everything from business continuity to incident management to risk assessments to making sure that the business is thoughtfully taking the risks. So my days are very different, but they're all very exciting.
Yeah, because the other day I spoke to you, you were in Budapest.
Yes.
Do you travel a lot?
So I for work, we actually travel because I've just built a team in Budapest. And so business resilience is one of the functions I manage. And so we've just placed a team there. We have an established office location in Budapest. It's been, I think we're hitting our 20th year anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, this year. So it was my first time going to Budapest, which was really exciting. It's a beautiful city. But yeah, no, it's I don't travel as much because I'm part of what we call our home office space. We certainly have over 550 branches all across the United States. So there is a fair bit of travel involved for individuals who do go to the different branches. But my team is primarily in Mumbai, okay, Budapest, and then New York.
How does one get into Morgan Stanley? What do top candidates do differently? And how do they get selected?
It's a good question. I definitely get a lot from the student body. I would say there are established, formalized, structured programs, just like any of the major banks on Wall Street, where there are the analyst programs, there are the programs that are geared towards summer internships, and then they're basically multi-year programs that lead to full-time rotational opportunities. These are very competitive programs. We recruit from all of the top universities across the country. And so you could go that route, which, like I said, is very selective and competitive. Or, it could be where you've applied to a one-off opportunity, whether it's an internship, whether it's a sort of an analyst or an associate level position. But I would say credentials are really important, just like any other bank. Your academic, obviously, achievements are really, really important. But other than that, your sort of aspirations for why you want to be in financial services, whether it's wealth management or on the institutional side, on the banking side. But the space is very competitive.
Are there any particular skills you need?
So I would say, depending on, if you are just starting out and you're coming in as a college graduate and you're walking into and stepping into the corporate workplace, I would imagine just sort of the basics of, what is finance? What are the different businesses? How do banks make money, right? Some of these basics that we would expect students to know and learn in school. But I would say, the eagerness to learn, the ability to articulate, the ability to prioritize and manage your time. Because as you're coming into the workplace, time management, prioritization, some of these basic skills that really do set you up for success as you progress through your career are really kind of core to anybody. So I would say those are some of the things we look at. And then, things like, what are your technical skills, right? How technical are you, depending on whether you want to be in technology versus the business? What are your soft skills like from a communications perspective? So there are a number of different aspects of a skill set that we will evaluate students on. So when you go through the recruiting process, especially for the analyst programs, there are a number of different aspects that the recruiters will take, and then they will ask you questions related to whether it's a hard sort of a technical skill or a soft skill.
So for students graduating from ERM, what jobs or internships could they apply to?
Yeah, no, it's another really good question. I would say ERM is a very versatile area. So, within the risk discipline, obviously you have firm-wide risk functions. And even within risk functions, as we know, there are different types of risks. So while I run operational risk, there's so many different types of risks, right? There's market risk, there's credit risk. So that's more sort of on the financial risk side. And then there's non-financial risk, which is cyber, vendor, operational, other things. So it really depends on what are the types of things that students want to be doing. What sort of excites them? Are they quant heavy, or do they like reasoning? Do they like logic, or do they like a gray space? I live in the gray world, right? There's never really a clear answer. But there are established frameworks for each of these risk disciplines. So I would say ERM does a really nice job to give you a fundamental sort of solid foundation. And then from there onwards, it really depends on what you want to do. And
what is one thing that candidates do wrong in the first 30 seconds of an interview?
So I would say the first question that interviewers will often ask is a very generic one, right? Which is, tell me about yourself. And that's a little bit of a trick question, in my opinion, because they typically will have your resume in front of them. And if they've done any homework, they typically know some of the basics about you, where you've gone to school, have you had any, work experience, something that they would want to hone in on. I think what they're trying to assess in the first 30 seconds is who you really are, what's your personality, are you able to do a pitch, right, in 30 seconds? And so it's a very short amount of time, but first impressions are really important. And I think those first 30 seconds are crucial to really see how confident you are, how quickly you can talk about who you are and what you bring to the table. So I think it's really more than just going through, hey, here's what I've done, and sort of just reiterating or regurgitating what's on your resume already. I would think about what makes you unique, who you are, and what is it that they should learn about you, right? And of course, the conversation will then, progress over the course of the interview. But I think it really is showing the uniqueness of your personality in the first 30 seconds.
True. So what are the best ways to introduce yourself in an interview, or in like a marketing event, or just in a place where you don't know anybody?
So I think the interview is very different. The context is very different than if you're in a marketing or a networking event, right? Because the stakes are very different. You're going for an interview because it also has consequences tied to it. You either land the job or they move on to the next candidate. Obviously, everybody has their sort of identification. Here's my name, here's what I've done, here's where I've gone to school. But the interview really is about, or the introduction really should be in an interview, what is the value that you can bring to them, right? To the person who's trying to hire you or who has the need, right? And I think most people think the interview is about them. And I typically will say the interview is more about the person who is interviewing you, because you need to convince them how can you contribute, right, to what they need. What are the values that you can bring to the table? And that's all based off of what they need. What are their needs? What are they looking for? What type of a person do they need to fill the seat? And how do you then meet that criteria? And how are you sort of the perfect candidate to come in, right, and take the job? So it's a little bit of a trade-off, I would say, and it's a balancing act to try to make sure you understand what they need, and then how do you convince them that you are the right candidate for the job.
So you need to be like super smart and like get to know
You
what
need
they're
to
looking
prep.
for.
I
Yeah.
think you need to prepare, right? You can have somebody who is a really easy person to talk to in an interview, or you can have somebody who is super formal, maybe not the easiest person, but you need to prepare for all of these scenarios, which is why I think you have to have your pitch ready. You have to know what skill sets you bring. Most importantly, you have to know the job you're going for. And I think a lot of people will come up with a pitch, will come up with what their story is, but then have difficulty or challenges pivoting or navigating or customizing depending on the difference in the job or the role that they're going for. And that, I think, is a very differentiating skill set. If you can do that, right, do your prep ahead of time, then I think it goes a long way, because it tells the recruiter that you've done your homework, right? This is the job you're going for and you know what the job requires.
True. When someone offers you a job, but the salary is lower than you expected, what do you say in that moment?
I think there's a number of different things to consider in this context. I think in New York, over the past few years, the salary information is now public, right? So going in, you typically know at least the range, right? The lower end of the range and the top end of the range. Again, this is all dependent on how junior or senior the position is. I think right off the bat, at least in New York, that should help at least ground you to say, do I want to go for this job? Or is it just not going to meet my expectations? And if it's not, the question becomes, is there room for negotiation, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I always tell students especially is the way interviews work typically is there's a screening call that happens in the beginning with a human resources representative, which is more of a basic, let's just kind of go through your background, make sure you check kind of all of their boxes. And then oftentimes they may ask your salary expectations right off the bat without you even having talked to anybody who is actually on the team that you'll be working on, or even the hiring manager. And so you're going into a conversation not really understanding the scope of the role. And oftentimes it trips people up, right? And they may blurt out a number. But really, experts say that you really shouldn't, right? You should wait and you should speak to more people about the actual role. Once you have a better understanding of what the expectations of the role are, how complicated is it, what is the skill set, do you meet it, are you the right candidate, then you can kind of talk through what is the range, what are the expectations, is there negotiation. The HR individuals typically, right, are not the ones determining the final number. It's sort of a joint partnership between the business that's going to fit the bill and HR to make sure it sort of fits their broad range and it's in alignment with firm requirements, right, from an HR perspective. So my advice would be, don't jump into the salary conversation. If HR asks, I think it's perfectly acceptable to say, I'd love to have more conversations. I don't really have a number in my mind. And maybe this is something we can revisit, right, once I have a better understanding of what the role requires.
So a couple of people have this misconception, if you quote a salary which is a little higher, So you'll get like, a little bit lower or around that range. So do you think that's like a good strategy?
So I would think about just general negotiation strategies, and that applies, I think, to salary as well. I think if you shoot higher and you end up somewhere in the middle, the question is, did you always mean to end up in the middle, right? Was that your original intention anyway? And that just kind of goes with what your strategy was. Now you have to be careful, because if you go too far up on the upper end, you may be completely stretching it, and it may be unrealistic, and the conversation may not really go further. So there's a little bit of a balancing act. It's a little bit of a push and pull in terms of how much range do you think there may be. I also would encourage people to do their research ahead of time, right? There's so many resources that are available to us nowadays, whether it's Glassdoor or some of these other platforms that at least give you a benchmark of what the going range for a particular role is. The other thing is location matters. So if you're in New York versus if you're in Dallas versus if you're in Idaho, right? There's differences. And so keeping those in mind, ranges can differ. And so that's probably the best thing to do, is before you even get into a conversation, making sure you're educating yourself on what the benchmark is.
Can I ask what the range of a Morgan Stanley internship, like the salary for
On
it?
at an analyst level?
Yeah.
I think if you're going into investment banking versus if you're going into an operations function versus technology, but some of that is unfair, because even in technology, there could be very high paying jobs.
For introverts watching, how do you enter a room full of strangers and not look socially awkward?
Well, for somebody who is, apparently I'm an introverted extrovert, which I don't even know what that means, but I would say a lot of people will resort to looking on our phones, right? Or just what are our pacifying behaviors? What sort of keeps us in our comfort zone? And, not making eye contact, or having sort of very, really closed body language, looking for corner spaces so that they can kind of hide. Being on your phone is the easiest, because you look like you're super busy, you've got something going on. I would say, before you enter a room, I would really think about why you're going there, right? And so the mental space that you're in before you enter a room, I think, is really important, right? And so I always talk about this in my strategic communications class, which is context is really important. So think about the priority, or how important this is to you. What are the personal things that are at stake? Is this a potential job that you may be thinking about? Is this going to potentially land you an opportunity that you were seeking? Maybe you were thinking about meeting somebody there that was going to be there, getting introduced to somebody, or you were just going to listen to someone and you didn't really have to think about playing an active part. Most people don't like networking with people they don't know, and it's a complete blank slate. But I think that's where you have to really evaluate and self-assess. Why am I here? What do I need to get out of it? And how much energy and time do I really want to be spending? And then I think you think about what are the next steps, right? If you don't want to be there for the entirety of the hour or what have you, maybe you think about, okay, I'm going to do 15 minutes or I'm going to do 20 minutes, but I'm going to make it worth it. I'm going to talk to 2 people, or, and are you going to be genuine, or are you going to be just another person who has a very sort of robotic interview, or robotic way of introducing themselves? So I think it really should be incumbent upon you as an individual to sort of self-assess.
Honestly, I feel like networking has become so cringe, because I know a couple of people, they'll just walk up to you, they'll say, hi, how are you, what do you do, blah, blah, blah. And then, can I get your Instagram? And that's it. And then they just walk away. So I just really get put off. I think I've been to like 2. And it's just like,
yeah,
it's awkward, right?
It's awkward in the sense that it's challenging. It's hard. It's hard. I think we are so used to communicating with our technology and devices, and whether it's text or email or who's really on the phone. You're only really FaceTiming people who are very close to you, either your close friends or your family. And so human interaction face to face is a little bit of a luxury, in my opinion, because A, people don't have a lot of time, and B, the preferred method is easier to text.
Yes.
And so I think I agree with you. I think I get this a lot. Can I add you on LinkedIn? Which you can, but just like any social media platform, it doesn't really matter how many connections you have.
Yes.
What matters is the organic connections and sort of how do you continue to nurture those connections?
Yeah.
Do you follow up? Do you stay in touch? Do you have a genuine reason to build a relationship? Those are all things to kind of think about.
True. Why is public speaking still the number one fear, and how do we actually get over it?
So again, like I said, my favorite course to teach is strategic communications, and if I could do it in person, I prefer to do it in person. I think public speaking it makes us vulnerable because you no longer can hide behind a written email or a text or even behind the other end of the phone. And again, is it a one-on-one conversation or is it a presentation that you're doing in front of people? The alternative now that we're in post-COVID area is people have gotten very comfortable with Zoom. And so you are behind a computer screen. And that also introduces a little bit of an added comfort level, in my opinion. But I think the best mode of communication is in person. Public speaking makes people nervous because it exposes all of their sort of vulnerabilities, right? And so if they're not comfortable with it, they haven't done it enough, or like you said, they're an introvert or they're soft-spoken, they can't project well, they don't have the tools and the tricks and the practice. The other thing I would say is nobody's born, right, perfect in terms of a communicator or a public speaker, right? Everybody who is really good at it practices over and over and over. And so the more you do it, the better you get. And it shows, right? It exudes confidence. You can figure out how to manage your nerves. You can, there's voice coaching. There's all sorts of things that you can do, but you really do have to put the time and the effort into it.
Voice and tone, they are like significant attributes. So do they impact the way people take you? Like, do people take you seriously because of your voice and tone?
They do. I think they make a big difference. I would say if your baseline as a speaker is, you're a soft-spoken person, you don't speak loud, that's just how you naturally are, then when you are speaking in a public setting or when you are commanding sort of a presence amongst a room full of senior leaders, if you are in the workplace, voice matters. How you can project your voice, the inflection in your voice, all of that matters. And so you really do have to first be self-aware of what is your baseline as a sort of a normal, what is your pitch? Do you speak loud? And so you have less work to do, right? Luckily, if you speak very low, then you've got work to do. And again, the practice piece really comes in at that point. Tone also matters, right? So I think, having the awareness and being conscious of, do you have to have more of a formal tone? Can you have a more casual tone? Don't have a monotone, right? Make sure that you have enough inflection and peaks and valleys in your voice so that it's easy for your audience to follow you, that they can tell and they can differentiate. This is not a robot talking, right? This is a human being who's going to expect some sort of a reaction. One of the examples, and it's an exercise that I often do, is when you're speaking, if you end every sentence that sounds more of like a question where the tone goes up and the pitch goes up, it's very ineffective because people sit there and they're like, are you going to say something else? Are you asking me a question? I'm not really sure if that was a statement. So it loses its effectiveness. So all of those things really, really do matter.
Can you give me like an example?
Yeah, I would say, a monotone is probably one of the the biggest culprits of where your message just doesn't land, or it's just not memorable, right? And people start to daydream, they start to get distracted. You see people like kind of looking elsewhere. Their eyes may gloss over, or they may pick up their phone. But this is where you just, if I was to talk and I didn't have anything to say and I wanted people to pay attention, and it's basically not really having any sort of inflection in your voice or in your tone. It's hard to follow the message, right? It doesn't register. Whereas if you speak naturally, then it's much easier for somebody to follow you, to understand you, to keep engaged. So all of those things are really important.
True. You are also a founder of Luminary Path. So it is a mentorship and leadership development program. What made you want to start this business outside of your corporate role?
So for years, and I've been teaching at Columbia, it's 7 years now, and I've been working at Morgan Stanley for about 20. And so over the course of my career, early on, I would seek mentors, people who I looked up to. And I've been very lucky where I've had so many mentors, leaders, sponsors who've given me such great advice and helped me sort of navigate in my career, right? And the choices that I've made along the way. But as I've gotten more and more senior, I've always been really passionate about paying it forward. And so I feel like I naturally gravitate towards people who are looking for advice or who need help or who just need somebody to listen to, somebody to, just kind of bounce off ideas with. And so I've just naturally, organically had a lot of relationships with people who are looking for guidance. And so, whether it's the student body, right, in Columbia as part of my courses, or people who just reach out over LinkedIn or other social media platforms, that's one of the reasons I always thought, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have more of a structured, formalized way to, pay this forward and really provide guidance to people who are really looking for it. So think about, if you're doing your master's and you really want to think about, okay, how do I enter the workplace? Or if you're already in the workplace, right, you've had a couple of years in and you don't love it and you want to do something different. Or how do I grow? How do I move up? How do I get promoted? How do I get paid more? Right? These are all things that so many of us have struggled with or have experienced. And, not everybody has always had someone to talk to. And that's just something that, I hope that Luminary Path provides. But it's just sort of a supplemental add to what I already naturally do as part of, whether it's Morgan Stanley's corporate culture or whether it's Columbia's, broader efforts in providing mentorship to students.
That's so cool. Yes. Very luminary enlightening.
Thanks.
You've been in rooms with some of the world's most senior executives. Has that changed the way you think about power?
It has. I think it gives you broader perspective. It is very illuminating to watch very senior people speak, right? Lead, manage, whether it's managing a crisis, whether it's commanding a new mandate, whether it's trying to persuade, negotiate, what have you. I think the way that senior leadership that are successful conduct themselves, it's really interesting to watch them. Leaders who show empathy, leaders who can really show their human side, right? And just inspire people. But it's really, they're passionate about what they do and they care about the people. So one of the things that's really interesting about having a 20+ career at Morgan Stanley is there are people that I work with now that are almost my peers who used to be, the managing directors and I used to be the analyst. And so they've kind of seen me grow. And along the way, they've really helped guide me, help me navigate the next role that I should have been thinking about. I think that journey is really interesting because now I'm in the room with these people who, years ago I would be thinking about, oh my God, how can I get to where they are? So it's pretty remarkable.
That's so cool. So Can you give me a breakdown of my body language? What does my body language tell about me?
I would say you come off very genuine and happy.
Okay.
As a person, you don't come off nervous at all.
Okay.
And I think the smile is your biggest, asset?
Okay.
That's what I would say.
Oh.
So you should leverage what your natural assets are. That's what I tell people. Like, think about what are your natural qualities. Try to not be someone you're not, because it will be in the short term, with a lot of focus and attention, you may get to where you want to, but in the long run it'll fail you, because it's not who you truly are. So think about who you truly are and then work on that, right? And by the way, like, there may be things that are part of your natural being where you're like, oh my God, I don't like this about me, or I don't, and people just kind of want to throw those away because it brings memories, or it brings, but those are the things I think people should work on.
Yeah, I've been told to like stop laughing a lot.
Why?
So I'm like consciously trying to tone it down a little bit.
I think
But
that's
like you
just who
said,
you
it's
are.
just so hard. It's just who I am.
Yeah, that's just who you are.
True.
Everybody could use somebody who's smiling, trust me.
You are an expert at reading people.
Am I?
So how do you spot a liar?
So people who are who are investigators by profession, right, in law enforcement or what have you, they typically will say that liars have a tough time making eye contact, right? Or they have a tough time making sustained eye contact. Or they try to hide their hands. They don't like to use their hands because gestures and body language exude truth and honesty, because it's a lot of unconscious behavior. It's not part of our sort of conscious behavior. So neuroscience kind of plays a role in this. I'm not the expert, so don't quote me. But they will say that, they won't really use their hands to speak. People who are telling the truth typically will use a lot of gestures, and because they want their whole body to be engaged when they're telling a story. So I don't know, but I will say that, these are all tips and tricks that are available to everybody, even the people who lie. So I'm sure that they've perfected them.
So this segment is called Philosophy and You.
Okay.
I know you're a mom and you're a wife and you're a woman in this era and generation. So we'd love to know your philosophical thoughts on life and just in general about everything.
Sure.
So what is that one thing you used to value that you do not value anymore?
Being liked by everybody, right? Worrying so much about fitting in and being liked. I always wanted to sort of fit in, right? Even if it was, hey, we were transferred for 2 years or 4 years or what have you. And I think that kind of stayed with me at least until probably my 20s. If you acknowledge and recognize that not everybody's going to love you, not everybody's going to like you, but the people who are important to you, those are the relationships that matter. Those are the relationships you should put time and effort into. I think your perspective changes, and I think you prioritize your time differently. So for me, that's been really liberating, because I don't sit there and worry about all of the things I think I used to worry about. So.
I have the same problem, especially as Asian women, and the culture is so real back at home.
It's sort of some untraining that we have to do, I think, as especially as women, as South Asian women, as we get older. It's interesting now that I'm a parent. I think about why my parents did the things they did, or when they were raising us, and you do tend to appreciate a lot of what they did. I think culturally it is. It definitely is something that you have to kind of push against. It's hard because it brings you out of your comfort zone. But I think as you get older, you become more confident. You know who you really are. Hopefully it becomes easier.
Yeah. What is that thing you think that we should unlearn? Like the women of today.
Unlearn the women of today? I would say, not limiting at least your children or even ourselves in who we think we not can be, but what are the things we can do. And so maybe it leads to the different professions that typically you would say, oh, those are only for men. I think in today's world, it is really apparent that women can do so many of those things. And they really can kind of stand right hand in hand with men. But I think it has to be sort of a balancing act, right? You have to recognize that it's, within a marriage, within a home, it's truly a partnership. So I think respect certainly comes first, but I think not limiting yourself in what you can do, and then having the support, right? Because that's really important. I think, at least this is, of course, my personal opinion, if you think you can do anything without the support of a spouse or without the support of your family members, I think that becomes really tough. Maybe in the short run you can, but in the long term, I think that becomes challenging.
You're a wife, a mom, and you have a job. So how do you manage all of that? Doesn't that become a lot?
It does. I think I get this question all the time. I think I really do have to give credit to my spouse. I think my husband is, a terrific partner. And I often don't say this out loud, so he will definitely be surprised to hear this. But I would say it really is your support system, right? It's my husband, it's my sister, who is always a phone call away. Whether I need to vent or just share. And I think it's really the mentality that at least I have, which is time management, prioritization, because the other thing you realize as you get older is you can't give 100% to everything, right? And so you can't be at work 100%, you can't be a mom 100%. So there's so many trade-offs, right, between your personal life, your professional life. And I remember before I made managing director at Morgan Stanley, I remember one of my colleagues saying to me, like, Saba, are you sure you want it? Like, it's a lot. Are you going to be able to handle it? Not that we don't think you're capable, but you should know what you're signing up for. And for me, instead of maybe the effect it should have had was, okay, maybe I should reassess. Maybe I should think, like, do I really want to do this? It had the opposite effect on me, where I was like, I am willing to accept this challenge. Like, why can't I have it all? And I think that's just like part of who I am. I think having such a dynamic childhood makes you more resilient, right? And so that kind of translates as you get older and you face bigger problems or bigger challenges. But yeah.
So yeah, we have one life, and I think we should all do what we want to do and not like compromise on everything.
You should at least try.
Should at least try.
Yeah.
True. When someone attacks you personally or professionally, we tend to go into a defense mode. What is like the best way to handle difficult situations?
So it's a very different question when it's asked in a professional setting, right? Because there are certain ways to handle it, and you can train yourselves to do so. Not reacting. Oftentimes, this is sort of in every company policy, right? And the most common example is when you get critical feedback, right? Don't react. Don't be emotional, right? Stay calm. And so I think that is sort of drained in people in a corporate environment. And so for the most part, if they have, sufficient self-control, they won't go off the rails and go crazy, although that can happen at times. But I think professionally, it's easier. And I think if it becomes hostile, or if it becomes aggressive, or, there's so many clear policies that protect you, right? There's violations, there's HR, there's escalations, there's all of these protocols that exist at work, which really are there to serve you, to make sure that you're in a healthy environment, you're in a safe environment, and that you can feel safe coming to work. On the personal front, I think it's a totally different ballgame. I think, if the person knows you and knows really how to trigger you, sometimes it's not easy, right? Like, we get into defense mode, it's a fight or flight. If there's sort of personal trauma that's attached to the relationship, I think that's part of self-growth. It's part of what you were asking about. How do you unlearn or untrain some of these behaviors? I think that's a lot of work that you have to do on your own. And it's I think for me, it's more about what are the things that I need to work on as an individual versus how do I make sure I control other people, because you never can. right? You can never control what comes out of somebody else's mouth. And so, the other thing is sometimes you can choose your relationships and you can create distance, and sometimes you can't because it's family.
It's family.
So, but I think it's all about how do you kind of grow and how do you kind of manage.
You can never change the other person.
That's
you
right.
can only change yourself.
That's right.
But you've spent a lot of time working in systems which require constant change, but people resist to change. Like, it's hard for them to accept change. How do you navigate through that?
So I think I am primed for change just because of, again, I think a lot of this just goes back to how I've grown up, right? And so much of it has to do with your life experiences, right? Are you someone who's experienced a lot of change, a lot of different circumstances? If you have, it sort of prepares you. If you haven't, then it's hard. And you're right, a lot of people are resistant to change. But unfortunately, if I think about where we live, we're in New York. I work for, one of the top tier banks. I work in wealth management, and my space is constantly changing. And so, the running joke that we have is the only constant here is change. And I would say the sooner you embrace it and accept it, the better you are in the long run. And if we just think about the world around us, right, it is constantly changing. Everything is moving so fast, right? There's so many things around us that, one day you wake up and the next day you wake up, like, things are completely different from a geopolitical perspective.
Unpredictable. Completely.
And so now, if you just, and I don't want to go into the AI conversation, but that's the other thing, right? That it is constantly evolving. And so you have to grow, you have to evolve, and you have to adapt. Because if you don't, then I think it's hard.
It's hard, true. You have been successfully married for so many years. So we want to know what makes a relationship work.
I think it takes some time. Again, it depends on how long you know each other from before you're actually married. How much time, did you have an opportunity to spend? But I think in the initial years, and of course age matters, right? Are you getting married in your 20s or are you getting married in your 30s? Big difference, because the later I think that you get married, again, personally, you sort of know who you are, and so you're less moldable, less flexible. I think that's what generally people say. But I would say for me, it's always been an equal partnership, and I think that's just on both sides, and I think that's just never been. It's a non-negotiable. We've always looked at things in as a unit, as partners. Everybody has differences, and personalities are different, and wants and needs and aspirations, and that's totally okay because you're two individuals. But I think your fundamental, really critical goals that you have in life, if you don't have alignment there, I think it becomes really difficult. So I think I've been lucky that we've been on the same page in terms of, where we want to be, or what kind of parenting do we want to adopt, or, it just makes things easier.
How difficult or different is it to raise kids in the West?
Listen, I think from what I see, and I have a lot of friends who are, in different parts of the world, and I think, and I'm no expert, but I think everything starts at home, regardless of what your external environment is like. And of course, external environment matters. Don't get me wrong. It definitely does. It has an impact. But I think it is, what are the values? What's the environment at home? And home should be, right, always your safe space. And that's what I try to tell my kids is, no matter what happens in school, what happens, in the outside world, you always can come home and tell, mommy and daddy what's going on. And I think parenting is very tricky because as much as you don't want to, what you know is how you were parented.
Yeah.
And so it then the conversation all comes right back to, there's certain behaviors that you will have to unlearn and untrain. And I do think that there is, I've probably not done enough of this, but I do think that there is actual coaching and training, and there's a system, right, in terms of what your responsibilities are as a parent. You're responsible for a life, if not more than one.
Yeah.
And you've chosen to bring this life, right? God has blessed you with a life, or multiple lives, hopefully, but it definitely should change the way you think. So I think for most parents, once they become and transition into parenthood, their sort of perspective on life completely changes, and I think that's so natural. It's very easy to blame your parents, right, for the mistakes that you're now making, right? Because that's just an easy cop-out. I think that if you really think about it and you appreciate things as you get older, especially if you're a parent yourself, you start to think about your parents tried to do the best they could with what they knew and what they had, right? And so you really have to think about what were their circumstances, how much education did they have, did they come here as immigrants, right? And they had to balance a lot, right? There's the whole generational gap that we think about. And you think about when your kids are older, they're probably going to have similar feelings. So I think you not only have to give your parents some grace, I think you have to give yourself some grace.
I agree. So this segment is called the rapid fire. And morning person or a night owl?
Morning person.
Email or phone call?
Ooh, depends.
So what can I do?
You should call me.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Ooh. Coffee in the morning, tea at night.
Which tea?
Oh, it's English breakfast. But it's chai.
Introvert or an extrovert?
Both. Depends.
Okay.
Yeah, but more introverted than extroverted.
Oh. One book every student should read?
I would say Muhammad Ali's biography. It's a good one.
My brother's name is Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yeah.
So it's Aliya, Alisha, and Ali.
Oh, all A's.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
All Alis, like all of us
That's
have
awesome.
ALIs in our names. Yeah. Most underrated leadership quality?
Empathy.
If your life were a movie, what would the title be?
Change is constant.
Best piece of advice you ever received?
Be patient, good things will come.
And this is the last segment. It's called The Last Word.
Okay.
What is that one skill you wish every student would have learned before they graduate that is not on the syllabus?
I would say the basics of communication skills. Ooh, listening.
What do you want to be remembered as?
A loving mom.
Aww, how cute. If you could go back to your 25-year-old self, what would you tell her?
It gets much better than this.
Any last words for someone watching this podcast who are trying to figure out their path in life?
I think you carve your own path. I think while it may be helpful to listen to other people's experiences and perspectives, I think you really have to be true to who you are and don't compromise. Life is too short.
So thank you so much, Saba. It was lovely having you. I learned so much, and this is going to be so insightful for everyone watching this podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was great. I appreciate it.
Thank
This was so much fun.